Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I'm so delighted you've joined me for a story tonight. And we're on the final part of our story. And boy, this is going to be a story you're not going to forget in a hurry. It's quite extraordinary what is going to happen to these 3 children. So before we get any further, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and go and get yourself something lovely to drink as we continue with the final part of our story tonight. My husband affectionately put his arm around me and drew me in for a big kiss.
There, didn't I tell you, love, that our teenagers would come around in the end? I notice that now that Wendy is here, our Hayley is positively glowing. And the way she's showing Wendy around our home, I'm quite sure I detected some pride in her demeanour. Maybe she doesn't want to admit that she really loves it here in the mountains. She certainly hid that well from us, did she not?
She sure did, I admitted. Later that afternoon, Hayley came dashing into the kitchen, with Wendy at her side. "Mum, we've just had an ace idea," she said with the enthusiasm of a cat on steroids. Even our cat Snoopy, when he's eaten some soft-boiled chicken, didn't look as ecstatic as my daughter did just then. At the time I was peeling potatoes for the Hasselback potatoes I intended making for dinner that night, to accompany the roast beef and the vegetables I was intending to serve. "What is it?" I asked, feeling the enthusiasm in the air, as if it was a cool breeze blowing against my skin. Hayley's brown eyes were shining, as if all the dark, hostile anger in them that I'd seen in the earlier hours of the morning had dissipated like the smoke from a chimney. My daughter shook her long brown ponytail and said, "Well, Wendy said it would be absolutely amazing, Mum, if we could go camping on the other side of the lake. On the edge of the woods. Overlooking the house, that is. We could go off to Canmore and buy some camping equipment from the outdoor shop there. And Dad can teach us how to build our own fire. I've always wanted to go camping. Scott thinks it's a great idea as well. He says he'll put the tent up for us. If we need anything, we can row over to the house. It's a quick shortcut, isn't it?" I will say the overly protective parent inside of me was screaming out that no, this was a bad idea. I didn't like the thought of my teenage children camping on the opposite side of the lake, even if it was overlooking the house. But Hayley had been so difficult of late, so all I could say to stop her grumpiness from returning is, "I'll talk about this with your father later." "Oh, Mum, you're the absolute best," said Hayley, impulsively throwing her arms around me, something she hadn't done in the last year or so. I was overwhelmed with this gesture of such affection that I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. I couldn't let Hayley see how teared up I was. But to be on the receiving end of her affection for a change, rather than her wrath, had been a long time in coming. That evening when me and my husband were retiring to bed, I told Kenneth about our teenagers' desire to camp on the property on the opposite side of the lake.
"I'm not sure it's a good idea, love," said my husband. "I don't feel good leaving them to their own devices."
"But, sweetheart, I'd like to remind you that our teenagers are relatively grown up. We can't mollycoddle them all the time, especially now we've moved out here. They've got to learn to be a little independent, don't you think? Scott is 16, for goodness sake. He's a responsible young man. If they feel uncomfortable about anything, they can easily row across the lake back to the house in a heartbeat. It's not as if they're camping miles away from home, is it?"
"That may be true enough," my husband said, "but I may remind you that Hayley and Wendy are still 14. That still makes them children as far as I'm concerned. I would have thought you'd be very against them camping out at night on their own, even if Scott is with them."
"Well, I will admit that I was initially, rather like you, somewhat apprehensive when Hayley asked me for the special favour. But I've had a chance to mull over it for a while, and frankly, I think it may not be such a bad idea after all. When Hayley came into the kitchen this evening, she begged me to let them go camping. She gave me such a big impulsive hug. She told me that I was the best. I can't remember the last time, Kenneth, that she said that to me. More often than not, she tells me she hates me. Let's just say, Kenneth, since Wendy arrived here to spend the summer holidays with us, Hayley's been an altogether different person. The change in her personality is simply amazing. She's been laughing and proudly showing Wendy around our home. I find it almost impossible to refuse her request. I told her, of course, I'd talk to you about it, as I didn't have it in me at the time to say no to her. She's been so miserable for so very long. I suppose I wanted to do something to get her on side for a change and help her realize that her mother isn't all bad, and that I do have some redeeming qualities after all, even though she described me as the world's worst mother, if you remember.
You don't have to make our teenagers like you, love. That isn't your job. Sometimes as parents our teenagers may despise us, but they soon learn that we only ever had their best interests at heart. We shouldn't give in to their every whim, or allow them to manipulate us at will, especially now we've come into money. Scott was telling me about a self-entitled brat whose father drives a Porsche at his school in Toronto. Nobody likes that young teenager, and rightly so from what he tells me. He told me the kid was obnoxious because his parents have given in to his every single request, refusing him absolutely nothing. And that's very dangerous. They're exceedingly wealthy. They don't realize they're doing him a grave disservice. Kids need to grow up respecting their elders. They need to work hard, and they mustn't grow up with the mentality that money grows on trees. If they think it does, they'll grow up with a self-entitled attitude. We don't want to be parents like that, who buckle under pressure from our children. They need to know they have to respect boundaries.
I know, love. But to be fair, you have to admit that our Hayley has been miserable for a long time. She loved our life back in Toronto, and our moving here has turned everything on its head. Please try and see things from her perspective. It would be nice to let her go camping with her best friend. We can keep an eye on all of them to ensure they're all right, without them even being aware of it. Think about it. They won't be that far away from us. You can always take a rowing boat to the other side and be there in minutes if you want to check up on them. What do you say? I really don't want to say no to Hayley.
My husband wrapped me tenderly in his arms, drawing me tightly to his chest in an all-embracing, very firm hug.
All right, we'll let them camp on the opposite side of the lake overlooking the house. But I will be keeping a stern eye out for them. I will sneak to their camping site every few hours or so, to ensure they don't see me. I'll give Scott a torch so if there is an emergency situation, he can flash the light several times across the water, so that I can come to his help. I'll keep checking the window during the night. Oh, you are a sport, sweetheart. Thank you so much for this.
The next morning our house was a buzz of excitement, as my husband took our teenagers to Canmore to buy some camping gear from the outdoor shop there. Our teenagers had never been camping before, but I reasoned on our property it should be perfectly safe for them. Wendy Markham. I was so excited to be going and staying with the Barker family for the summer holidays at their beautiful new home in the mountains that Hayley had told me all about in her text messages to me. She claimed she was utterly miserable in her new abode and wanted to return to Toronto to move in with me and my mother.
I hate it here, she wrote. My mother is such a cow. I miss school and I miss you. I hate my parents. The only decent person around here is Scott and our cat Snoopy. Everybody else sucks.
To tell you the truth, when Kenneth Barker came into money from a distant relative in the Hebrides in Scotland, I was devastated to learn about their good news, only because I knew that things might change exponentially in my friendship with Hayley, and I really didn't want anything to come between the two of us, and money can sometimes cause great division between people. Selfishly, I didn't want that to happen, as Hayley and I were the best friends. We've been like that since second grade. When Hayley told me she was moving to Alberta, close to the town of Canmore, I think my heart felt as if it had been put through a garlic press, quite literally. Hayley was like a beloved sister to me, and the thought of her leaving Toronto for good made me feel as if our friendship had come to a close.
rather like the last chapter in an amazing book that you read, that you just do not want to come to an end. I knew all too well when people move away, even with the availability of social media, it is likely that the wide distance between us can effectively eat away at the friendship. I was surprised to find that Hayley was far from pleased her family had come into money. You'd expect great news like that to make people dance with joy, but I noticed that that failed to happen with Hayley, or any other member of the Barker family for that matter. I think Mr. Barker's now swollen bank account was something the Barker family was struggling to accept and taking time to adjust to, and I think they were afraid that having money might change them into less likeable people. Personally, knowing the Barkers as I do, and I've known them for all my life, I didn't think there was any danger of that ever happening, as the Barker family are down to earth and the warmest people you can ever hope to meet. Hayley couldn't believe that I was going to stay with her for the summer holidays when she walked into the pantry to put some flour and sugar away, and I pounced out at her from the shadows like a leopard in hiding. She got quite the shock. It was hilarious to see her reaction in seeing me. But we walked out of that pantry completely covered in flour. When Hayley showed me around the property, she seemed pretty proud of her new abode, so I couldn't understand why she'd complained so much to me in her texts, telling me continuously how much she hated her parents and loathed her new home. When I first arrived at Hayley's home, I was absolutely overwhelmed by how beautiful everything was. It was the most perfect holiday setting, and I couldn't imagine a more idyllic way of life. I remember Hayley and Scott took me rowing across the lake, which was so much fun, as the Barker family's house overlooks the silvery lake that is heavily stocked with fish. After our fun time rowing, we went riding on ATVs through the woods. It was when we returned from a very exciting ATV ride in the woods, I was overcome with a great idea, because the Barkers live on a perfect property that really is suitable for all kinds of very exciting outdoor pursuits. I was the one who suggested we should go camping together, put our tent up on the opposite side of the lake overlooking the house and fringing the forest, and my idea was met with a lot of enthusiasm from both Scott and Hayley, who couldn't understand why they hadn't thought of camping out on the property before. "That's a brilliant idea," said Scott. "I can't believe I never thought of it before. The only problem is Mum and Dad. I'm not sure they'll agree. They might put their foot down on this one." I think we were surprised when both Mr. and Mrs. Barker agreed to let us camp on the opposite side of the lake overlooking the house. When we realized they had agreed to our request, we were a buzz of excitement. Mr. Barker promptly took us into town to buy camping gear, and by the late afternoon, Scott, with the help of his father, had erected a 4-man tent for us that we made sumptuously cosy. It looked absolutely wonderful. Mr. Barker also showed us how to make a fire, and Mrs. Barker made us the most incredible, delectable picnic basket, along with an icebox filled with ice-cold drinks. We were given a grill we could use over the fire pit to cook our chicken, kebabs and burgers with. It was wonderful being camped opposite the lake, and during the course of the afternoon we had taken several trips across the lake in the rowing boat, which had been exhilarating. We had spotted so much bird life, some deers coming to the water to drink, along with a wild duck swimming across the water with her ducklings, which were the cutest things I'd ever beheld. The boat trips across the lake enabled us to gather some more provisions from the Barker home, to make our camping experience as luxuriously indulgent as possible, and why not? Our tent was full of plump cushions, sleeping bags and duvet covers. As the sun retired to bed for the day, lazily settling across the horizon in a kaleidoscope of magnificent tangerines and oranges, we began to cook our chicken over the grill and tuck into plates of potato and Greek salad, while the chicken and burgers we cooked tasted amazing, melting in our mouths like butter. I think we all happily agreed that nothing tasted better than eating al fresco. "It's so cool being out here without the adults," Hayley admitted, "and this is the best chicken I've ever eaten." Before long the sky became dark, and we sat by the crackling fire, staring up in awe at the Milky Way. We studied the constellations. We began to make some s'mores and tell each other ghost stories. And that was when we heard the strange sound of a woman crying out in pain. Sometimes the sounds would stop for a moment, and then they'd come back again, almost worse than they were in the beginning. All of us looked at each other in astonishment, wondering who it was that could be crying out like this. The strange, agonizing cries were definitely coming from the woods.
"What on earth was that?" I asked, looking from Scott to Haley. "It sounds like a woman crying out in pain. But this is private property we're on. No one should be out and about in the woods on your land, should they?" "No one is on the property," Scott agreed. "Unless, of course, someone is trespassing. That is a possibility. It can happen, I imagine." "Maybe it's a wild animal," Haley suggested. "I think sometimes they do sound like humans, don't they? I've heard that some birds can make alarming calls that sound very human." "That's not a bird," said Scott, frowning. "There's no way that's a bird. I'd put money on that." All of a sudden we heard the frantic cries all over again. My heart almost began to thump in my chest because I was so bewildered by what I was hearing and wondered what it was. But I knew in that moment that there had to be a woman out there in the woods that was crying out in pain and probably desperately needed our help. Mr. Barker had given Scott his hunting rifle for protection. I noticed Scott began to grab it, holding it tightly to his chest, and then he said, "I'm going to check the noise out. It's coming from in the woods. You two can stay here if you like, but I can't sit here comfortably listening to that. Someone might possibly need our help." "No way you're going alone, Scott," I insisted. "I'm coming with you. I need to find out what that noise is too." "I don't want to go out there," said Haley. "I'm scared of the woods. It's dark in there. There's no way I'm going." "That's fine. You stay here," I told her. "But I'm going with Scott. I'm sorry. I have to go with him. I can't just listen to that noise and do nothing about it." "There is no way you're both going without me," said Haley. "I don't want to be left on my own." At this point, it was very dark outside, but the light of our headlamps helped to ease the intimidation of our walk through the woods, to give us enough light to help us navigate our way through the labyrinth of trees. I had been in the woods on the ATV a couple of times, but during the night hours, the whole woodgrove looked eerily haunting. It was creepy walking down the woodland trails through the trees, leaving our tent far behind us. I told myself someone was obviously in trouble. They might desperately need our help. And how would I feel if a woman's body was discovered in the woods the following morning, and we could potentially have saved her life if we'd got to her in time? My mother told me a story once that always stuck in my mind, about two families living next door to each other. One night the neighbours heard the terrified screams of a woman in distress, coming from the house next door to them. They didn't even bother to call the police or to investigate. They didn't tell the police that someone might be in trouble or need help. Instead, they told themselves it was just a neighbourhood dispute and they didn't want to get involved. Little did they know that if they had the decency to call for help, the woman who'd been stabbed brutally by her own son, simply because she refused to give him money for drugs, could potentially still have been alive. Instead, her son had left her dying in the house while he drove away in her car. She had been alone all night and too weak to call for help, but in her blood she managed to write on the wall the name of her son, so the police could identify her killer. So thankfully he was caught and arrested, confessing to the killing of his mother. I believe the autopsy revealed that she had bled out slowly, and had she been rescued in time, she would definitely have survived that brutal blow. So if the neighbours had bothered to call the police, she would likely be alive today. The story had stuck to my mind like superglue, and I had inwardly vowed that if I ever believed someone was in trouble in the future, I would definitely call for help on their behalf, and never turn a blind eye to someone potentially in grievous trouble. As far as Scott and I were concerned, the desperate cries we were hearing from the woods needed to be investigated. They simply couldn't be ignored. Maybe it was a wild animal we were hearing, but it really did sound like a woman in distress. All kinds of wild, hypothetical scenarios began to play out in my mind like a movie theatre. I could almost envisage a woman being stabbed,
and abandoned in the woods, left there by someone who wanted her dead. I think the urgency of needing to find this woman, whoever she was, overcame any of my preconceived trepidations about wandering in the woods at the dead of night like this. At least it was comforting and reassuring to have Scott and Haley at my side, so I felt a lot less vulnerable, and it was a relief to know that Scott had his rifle at the ready, in case we came face to face with a dangerous wild animal. Haley kept insisting that the noise we were hearing was from a wild animal, or possibly even a large bird. She claimed that she wanted to go back to the tent. The woods were giving her the creeps. "Haley, you said you wanted to come with us," said Scott. "Quit complaining, will you? Someone is obviously in trouble, and they desperately need our help. And I'm not going to ignore them. If we just leave them to die, how would you feel about that? We need to be like the Good Samaritan in the Bible, not like the people that walked away so willfully." Scott told me later he also had visions of finding a woman in the woods, possibly wearing a white nightdress that was soaked in the crimson of her blood, who was hanging on to life by a silver thread. He imagined lifting her in his arms and running back to the lake, to row across to the other side, to get help from his parents. He'd also flash his torch across the water, hoping his father would get our signals. Mrs. Barker's own father had been a doctor, working in A&E, so if anyone knew how to treat a patient in distress, it would likely be her. "I don't like it here," Haley kept complaining. "There are shadows everywhere. I feel as if we're being watched all the time." Me and Scott ignored Haley, as when she started complaining, she began to bleat like a billy goat. All of a sudden, the crying in the woods got a whole lot worse, and there was no doubt in my mind at this point that someone was in grave distress. The sound was so close, far too close for comfort. It felt as if whoever was in trouble was mere feet away from us. And that was when we saw her, squatting on the ground, crying out in pain. At first the figure seemed ambiguously blurry, as the dark, tenebrific shadows played games with my focus, and I was struggling to decipher what it was that I was actually seeing. It took a while to adjust to the light. I could see the silhouette was humanoid in shape, but even squatting on the ground, it appeared extremely large. At first I struggled to make sense of what I was perceiving, and then I realized to my astonishment that I was staring at a large female Bigfoot, who, believe it or not, was in the process of giving birth, which was why she was in so much pain. Her legs were spread wide open. She was looking down on herself for any signs of the baby's head to arrive, but every time the pain became excruciating, she cried out again. In that quintessential moment, all reason and common sense seemed to abandon me. I've heard of people who visited South Africa, going to the Kruger National Park, and in haste jumping out of their cars just to take a quick photograph of a lion, and before they know it, the lion launches an attack on them, before they can even get back into their cars. And what happens? It's over cadovers for them. I've always wondered to myself how people like that could impulsively do something so recklessly stupid. And yet I'm a fine one to talk, aren't I? Because here I was running up to a potential wild animal with human-like influences who might perceive my very presence to be a threat, especially in a vulnerable moment like this, when she was giving birth, which she clearly was. I knew this female Bigfoot was large and powerfully built, and if she wasn't friendly, I could be in potentially mortal danger. But like those foolish tourists at the Kruger National Park in South Africa, the desire to help this Bigfoot overcame any doubts that I might be entertaining. I think it's a gut female instinct to help other women in the throes of childbirth. I really do. I wanted to be around to help this female Bigfoot give birth, to encourage her and help her in any way I possibly could. I know that I was at my older sister's bedside when she gave birth to her son Tom. I was there to hold her hand as the baby slipped through her birthing canal. All the while she cried out in pain until the baby was finally delivered. And she told me afterwards that my presence had made the pain a lot more bearable. Scott was shouting to me to get back at once, for I had run up to the female Bigfoot without even looking back or giving my friends a sideways glance. The Bigfoot was so focused on delivering her baby that for a moment she barely noticed me. Before I could second-guess myself, I was there at her side, saying to her, "You can do it! Go on! You can do it!" The female Bigfoot had not known we were there, but when she saw me standing by her side, she did not react adversely, nor was she aggressive in any way. Instead, there was a huge relief written on her face, as if she was so delighted, so glad she didn't have to deliver her baby all on her own, and that she was in good company, although I'm not sure she expected to encounter us in the way that she actually did. I'm not sure what she was doing in the woods, without any of her kind being around. Maybe she wanted to deliver her baby in a quiet place on her own, while not being disturbed. Or maybe her waters had broken prematurely, and she had been forced to deliver her baby alone. I rather suspected that the latter might indeed be the case. When the female Bigfoot looked up at me with her dark, treacle-coloured, soulful eyes, I could see the relief written in their depths. But what happened next amazed me. When she telepathically communicated with me and spoke to me in my head in English. "It's so painful," she said, crying out again. "Ah! Ah! No one told me giving birth could hurt so much. Ah! Ah! I was here in the woods looking for mushrooms, and then the pain. It was bad, really bad." I put my hand on the Bigfoot's sizable back, patting her gently to encourage her. "You can do it," I said. At this point, both Scott and Haley, who had been watching me intently, stepped forwards. Their fears appeared to dissipate. I think they sensed the Bigfoot was definitely a gentle soul, who imposed absolutely no threat to them. So now they were also eager to help. They both began to actively encourage the female Bigfoot to push, as it was extremely apparent to us that the baby was on its way. "Push!" Haley encouraged. "Push!" While Scott in a kind voice said, "Try not to think about the pain." It was ironic all three of us had heard the Bigfoot speaking to us telepathically, and her communication between us was so incredibly natural, that we forgot about how dark and menacing it was in the woods, and that we were standing next to a humanoid creature that could easily be described as an apex predator, given her enormous stature. But none of that seemed to matter to us. It felt natural to be in her presence, and I knew she was extremely glad not to be giving birth alone. I was glad we could be here for her. I wondered where the rest of her family were, and it was like she heard my very thoughts, because she said, "They're far from here. They don't know the baby's coming. It's arrived too early. I never expected this. I wouldn't have come here had I known." The Bigfoot was so human that despite her large, intimidating size, we all embraced this poignant moment. Then it happened. A head began to show itself outside the birthing canal. I became incredibly excited. I was thrilled by this amazing moment. And then very suddenly, the baby appeared to slip out of the female Bigfoot, at first with a bit of a struggle, and then finally it just slid out. She instinctively knew what she needed to do with the cord. I didn't want to look at this particular moment at what she was doing, as I abhorred the sight of the blood. The baby was covered in blood and was all wet, but she wiped away the blood with her hand, and then the baby cried, and we all began to laugh. And I heard her saying in my head, "It's a boy! It's a boy!" The female Bigfoot looked down at her baby so proudly, and we all stared at the baby in wondrous awe, as if we couldn't believe it had actually arrived safe and sound in this world. It looked up at us with the cutest, most mischievous eyes that I have ever seen. And it appeared to be as sharp as a tack for one so young, much more so than a human baby is. It was covered in dark hair like its mother, and was the cutest, most adorable thing I have ever beheld. The female Bigfoot did something we never imagined possible. She handed her baby over to each one of us to give it a cuddle, and when we handed the baby back to her, I could swear she was smiling. I could see the absolute delight in her eyes. She was thrilled to be a mother, and was eager to show off her new addition to her family to us. She was extremely proud of her baby. The placenta finally came out of the body, and to my horror the Bigfoot ate it up. But once again I looked away. It was too much for me to stomach seeing that. I could see Haley almost squirmed, as she always hated eating liver and onions at home, and the placenta looked like the liver that her mother sometimes cooked. I don't think she ate the placenta because she was hungry. I think the Bigfoot ate it because it's supposed to be highly nutritious. "You did it," I said to her. "Your baby is beautiful. It's a boy. It's a boy." The female Bigfoot glowed with so much joy and happiness. It was infectious, and everyone was smiling with glee. "I tried to have a baby, and it never happened," she said. "I was so sad. But now I'm a mother." The female Bigfoot put the baby Bigfoot to her breast, and the baby began to suckle. She nursed it for a long while, and then, when the baby seemed satisfied, she rose up to her feet, holding her baby tenderly in her arms. It was in that moment I was dumbstruck by how incredibly tall the Bigfoot was. When she was standing on 2 feet, she was easily 7.5 foot tall, possibly even 8. I can't be entirely sure. But she was powerfully built and very robust. One thing I noticed about the female Bigfoot, that after she delivered her baby, her stomach became completely flat. And it's not like that for human mothers. It takes a while for their stomach to return to its normal shape. I observed that her breasts were also pretty small, especially for a nursing mother, but they were swollen. I remember she had a beautiful face and the kindest eyes I've ever seen. All of a sudden, to my amazement, she spoke to us out loud in a strange language that I'd never heard before. And I understood exactly what she was saying, for the telepathic translation continued. "Kila kwika, kasa kwishana, kula sipati." "You have made my delivery tonight very special. I was so desperately alone until you came along. I'll never forget your kindness." And even when she spoke to us, we just knew everything she was saying. With that, she trotted away, giving us a smile and a nod, placing the baby on her shoulders. I was so sad when the Bigfoot went away, almost as if there was a huge hole in my heart. But this incredible experience with a female Bigfoot quite literally changed my life. Our encounter with this magnificent mother was something I knew that I would never be able to forget. I was so incredibly glad I had come to the Barker's family home to spend the summer holidays with them, for I would not have missed this experience for the entire world. Me, Haley, and Scott were high-fiving each other with delight, and Scott was boasting about the fact that if we hadn't investigated the source of the crying, we'd never have had such an incredible encounter. Haley was also reminded that she had been too spooked to go searching for the source of the crying, and had only come along as she didn't want to be left alone. And look what she'd have missed out on. In the tent, Haley's eyes were shining like 2 silvery stars. I'd never seen her look more upbeat than she did now. "The female Bigfoot was so beautiful," she kept saying. "Oh, so beautiful." I knew in that moment that Haley's determination to hate her new home in Alberta was beginning to rapidly dissolve, rather like the aspirin in a glass of water. She knew that she had been in Toronto. Well, had she been there, that is, she'd never have been privy to such an exceptional experience like this. Polly Barker. I was delighted that my 2 teenage children and their friend Wendy had really enjoyed their camping trip on the opposite side of the lake overlooking our home. My husband had checked on the sleeping brigade only in the early hours of the morning, and all appeared calm and serene around the campsite. My husband had taken a peek through the tent and seen all 4 bodies caught up in a deep sleep, or seemingly dead to this world, so to speak. When all 3 teenagers returned to the house on the boat, it was a lot later in the morning than I had initially anticipated. It was getting close to lunchtime by now. I was certain they'd invariably be half-starved, as since we'd moved to the mountains, my 2 teenagers had developed insatiable appetites. I noticed all 3 teenagers were glowing with happiness and joy that they didn't seem to be able to hide. When they climbed out of the boat, they pulled it to the shoreline, and then all 3 of them headed towards the house. It was a magnificently beautiful morning, with the sunshine casting its eager prisms of light across the day, like a warm hug. When the teenagers burst into the kitchen, Haley said to me, "Mum, you'll never believe what happened to us last night. It was incredible. Absolutely incredible. I chuckled. I'm very glad you had a lovely time. Was it fun camping by the lake and watching the sun set last night? I'm sure it must have been a spectacular sight to behold. Mum, it was better than fun. Much better than fun, said Haley ecstatically. It was the best night of my entire life, if you must know. Mine too, chorused Scott and Wendy at the same time. Well, I'm very glad to hear that, I said. I noticed Scott had surreptitiously grabbed his sister by the arm, pulling her towards him and whispering something in her ear. She visibly frowned, scrunched up her face disapprovingly, and looked at her brother with a wary expression. Why not? Why can't I tell her? I didn't know what it was that Scott was telling his sister not to tell me, but it was of little concern to me. All that mattered to me was that they had enjoyed their camping, and it was clear that they did. Besides anything else, I knew teenagers had their secrets that they kept from grown-ups, which went with the territory of being a teenager. Judging by Haley's excitable expression, she was very eager to share the secret with me of hers, which was an all-time first, but my son Scott was trying to make sure she shut up. I'm so pleased you had such a fabulous time camping, I said, pretending not to notice the strange silent signals going on between Haley and Scott. Signals I myself had made as a girl to my own brother, when I feared something that he might say to our parents would get us into a whole heap of trouble. If the teenagers had done something they shouldn't, I'd rather not know about it, I thought. For me personally, seeing Haley as radiant as she was that morning, I couldn't help thinking to myself that she had almost certainly been flung out of her melancholia, rather like a stone in a slingshot, reaching for the brightest rainbow in the sky. I'd never seen Haley look so animated before. Her brown eyes that were once so frosty, with her disapproval towards me, seemed to have softened. She genuinely looked happy. I was so grateful that Wendy had joined us for the summer holidays, for it was clear to me she had certainly worked her magic on my daughter, and made her realize our new lives living in Alberta were indeed very special. Mum, you're not going to believe what happened to us last night, Haley repeated again, giving her brother an impertinent glare as if to say, I'm going to tell Mum our secret, whether you like it or not. I told you, Haley, said Scott. Don't tell Mum what happened to us. She won't believe you. She won't believe you, I promise you. Your mother's cool, said Wendy. I'm sure she'll believe us. Go on, Scott. Let Haley tell your mother what happened. Well, why don't you try me? I said. What is it you want to tell me, Haley? You've got me extremely intrigued. What happened to you last night? We saw a female Bigfoot last night, Mum, giving birth in the woods. She gave birth to the most beautiful baby boy. She was so nice to us, Mum. We encouraged her while she gave birth. She thanked us for being there for her. We understood everything she communicated with us. It was the most beautiful moment of my entire life. She was huge, Mum, really, really big. She had the loveliest eyes I've ever seen. She understood what we were thinking. I've never met anyone like her before. I thought when Wendy went over to her that the Bigfoot would get angry and aggressive. But on the contrary, she was kind. She welcomed us being there for her. I stared at my daughter incredulously, feeling certain that all three teenagers had set me up for some really big wind-up that they'd been planning all along. I knew Scott was a brilliant practical joker, so this wouldn't be a first. There was no way on God's earth that what Haley was proclaiming could possibly be true. I didn't believe it for a single second. I think Scott could see the doubt written across my face, as he promptly said, We had you fooled, Mum. But when he gave me a smile, I couldn't help but notice it did not meet his eyes, like it usually did when he was winding me up. I can't believe you almost believed us, he said. I watched the teenagers exchange strange glances between each other. Then they promptly left the kitchen, and that's when I heard Scott whisper to Haley, Are you stupid or what? Didn't I tell you not to tell Mum any of this? You're such an idiot, Haley. Mum would never believe us, and she didn't. You could see the doubt on her face. You've made a fool of yourself. I told you this is a secret we can't share with anyone. If you tell people what we saw, they'll think you're as nutty as a fruitcake. People don't believe in Bigfoot. It's like telling Mum you saw a fairy flying around in the backyard. She'd never believe you on that. She already thinks we're joking. You need to leave it that way. It's for the best, believe me. I didn't know what to make of the teenagers' behaviour. They were whispering a lot among themselves and seemed unduly excited, so much so that I was beginning to wonder if the story they'd actually shared with me could possibly be true. I thought about it long and hard. They claimed to have seen a Bigfoot female giving birth. The more I thought about this their preposterous, rather unlikely story, the more doubtful and cynical I became, until one evening when I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink on the second week of the summer holidays, I happened to glance out of the window, overlooking the lake, and that was when I saw a female Bigfoot on the opposite side of the lake, carrying a baby Bigfoot on her shoulders. I almost had a heart attack on the spot when I saw her, rubbing my eyes several times to assure myself that what I was seeing was real. She waded in the shallow end of the lake, and I saw her snatch something from the water so fast and hit it so hard on the ground. I couldn't believe it when I realized she'd caught a fish with her bare hands. How could anybody do that? I watched her glide away into the woods until she was gone from my sight, and that was when I realized this must be the Bigfoot my teenage kids had seen giving birth, and their story was obviously true. When I told them about what I'd seen, they told me about their remarkable encounter with a female Bigfoot when they were camping that night. "You saw her, Mum," said Haley excitedly. "So now you believe us." "I believe you," I said. Ostensibly, I genuinely believe Wendy coming to stay with us for the summer holidays, along with the bizarre encounter that Haley had with a female Bigfoot giving birth in the woods, of all things, made my insolent daughter realize that living in Alberta was pretty cool after all. As for the female Bigfoot, my teenagers have claimed to have seen her in passing several times. My husband did eventually build his pottery studio, but I hasten to say he's still producing duds. So I guess some things never change. So there you are. That's my story.
Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.